The blinding lights of the congressional hearing room cast a harsh glow on 27-year-old Karoline Leavitt's composed face as she took her place at the witness table. The young deputy press secretary from the White House wore her blonde hair neatly, tied back, her navy blazer sharp against the polished mahogany. Just moments earlier, Nancy Pelosi had entered the chamber, her entourage trailing behind. Her sharp eyes locked on Leavitt, a cold, calculated smile curling at the corners of her lips. "Today we unmask the lies," Pelosi declared, her voice echoing across the packed chamber with unwavering confidence. "Miss Leavitt is merely a MAGA mouthpiece who lacks the facts to defend her fantasy version of the economy." The atmosphere thickened with tension. Democratic representatives exchanged satisfied looks, some nodding along. Across the aisle, Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Leavitt remained unmoved, her piercing blue eyes focused, hands calmly aligning her notes. She knew this was more than a political battle. It was a test of endurance, truth, and resolve. Pelosi, armed with decades of political clout and a mastery of public confrontation, believed she could dismantle the young conservative before the nation. But Karoline Leavitt was not here to be dismantled. What unfolded in the next 3 minutes stunned Washington and rendered millions of Americans silent. Pelosi believed she had crafted the perfect ambush for Leavitt until the young deputy press secretary produced evidence no one anticipated. Before we dive into the chaos that followed, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more raw political showdowns the mainstream media won't dare to air. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just another young staffer. At only 27, she had already made history as the youngest press secretary for a House Republican conference before stepping into the national spotlight with the Trump administration. Raised in a working-class New Hampshire household, she understood the kitchen table issues affecting average Americans, something most Washington elites never could. For months, Democrats had criticized her relentless support of Trump's economic strategy. Liberal networks scoffed at her youth. One MSNBC anchor even dismissed her as a child pretending to play adult politics. But those who mocked her quickly discovered she was anything but naive. Leavitt embodied sharp intellect, fearless determination, and an unshakable belief in her principles. Opposite her sat Nancy Pelosi, the 84-year-old Democratic titan who had spent over 40 years navigating Capitol Hill. Draped in an expensive designer suit and exuding practiced poise, she symbolized the establishment Leavitt had sworn to challenge. Pelosi had meticulously planned this hearing, intending to undermine the administration's economic message and humiliate Leavitt live on national television. For too long, this administration has deceived the American people about jobs, wages, and inflation, Pelosi proclaimed, her voice booming across the hearing room. Today, Miss Leavitt will be forced to defend these fabrications with facts. But as the room leaned in, expecting a young woman to falter, Leavitt prepared to turn the entire narrative on its head. Something told Pelosi this young woman would struggle. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't simply a debate about numbers or job reports. It was a war over credibility and public trust. If Pelosi managed to dismantle Leavitt publicly, it would fracture the administration's entire messaging playbook. Democrats were poised, ready to weaponize any stumble as ammunition for future legislative fights. Leavitt understood the gravity. She carried more than her personal reputation. She bore the burden of her administration's entire economic defense. Cameras swept across the hearing room, capturing the stark duality of the moment. Pelosi, poised, confident, wrapped in decades of political armor. She embodied the establishment, the old guard of polished power. Leavitt, young, steady, and underestimated, stood as a symbol of a rising conservative generation, challenging the status quo. The hearing opened. Pelosi wasted no time. She rose deliberately, adjusting her reading glasses, her presence dominating the space. "Miss Leavitt," she began, her tone sharp, "you've publicly claimed this administration has built the strongest economy in American history." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Yet inflation has hit working families harder than at any point in the last 10 years. Would you like to explain that contradiction?" The room hushed. All eyes turned to Leavitt, Republican. Members tensed, uncertain. Was she ready for this? Leavitt didn't blink. She leaned slightly forward, hands folded, voice calm. "Madam Speaker, thank you for the question. Our administration has created over 2 million jobs in just the past year. Unemployment is at a historic low 3.8%. Americans are working and wages are rising. Before she could finish, Pelosi raised a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. Miss Leavitt, please spare us the talking points, she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. The American people are paying 40% more at the grocery store. That's not success, it's failure. Let's deal in reality, not rehearsed numbers. It was a strategic interruption, a deliberate flex meant to rattle Leavitt. Several Democrats chuckled quietly. Pelosi smirked, but Leavitt didn't flinch. She took a breath, adjusted her microphone, and prepared to strike back with something far more powerful than talking points, undeniable proof. And what she said next would change everything. A journalist from the Washington Post tapped furiously on his keyboard, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. The atmosphere grew heavier when Pelosi stepped away from the committee desk and toward a large digital display. With a sharp gesture to her aide, the screen behind her flickered to life. "Let me show you something, Miss Leavitt," Pelosi said, her tone both smug and theatrical. The screen filled with a vibrant graph showing a sharp climb in consumer prices. "This," she declared, pointing to the chart, "is what American families are dealing with daily. Your administration's reckless policies helped create this inflationary crisis." Leavitt leaned forward, ready to respond. But Pelosi cut in before she could speak. "And let's not forget your misleading statements on job creation," Pelosi added quickly. A second graph appeared, this one clearly altered to imply job growth had already surged before the current administration began. The manipulation was subtle but effective. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Democratic representatives leaned back in their chairs, grinning. Their confidence was building. Pelosi wasn't just presenting data. She was constructing a takedown, brick by brick. Pelosi clicked to another slide, this one quoting Leavitt from a past press briefing, entirely out of context. "Furthermore," she continued, raising her voice slightly, "last month you claimed manufacturing was experiencing historic growth. Yet according to the Federal Reserve's own report, manufacturing output actually declined during that same period." She paused deliberately and turned toward the press cameras. "The American people deserve truth, not spin. They need facts, not fiction." Republicans on the committee fidgeted in their seats. Pelosi's strategy was working. Across the internet, social media lit up with real-time reactions. Progressive commentators hailed the hearing as a triumph of transparency. Edits of Pelosi's remarks were already being clipped and shared across major platforms, trending within minutes. Then, everything changed. As Pelosi stepped back, seemingly concluding her 20-minute dismantling, Karoline Leavitt calmly reached for a blue folder resting quietly in front of her. Her hands were steady, her expression unreadable. She didn't look defeated. She didn't even look rattled. Instead, she looked ready. "Madam Speaker," Leavitt said clearly, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel, "I want to thank you for your extensive remarks." Her tone was calm but firm, confident but measured. "Before I address each of your concerns directly, I would like to enter several documents into the congressional record." Every eye in the room turned to the folder in her hands. Something was coming, and nobody, least of all Nancy Pelosi, was prepared for it. Pelosi's expression shifted, barely perceptible to most, but Leavitt noticed. It was a brief flicker, a crack in the confidence of someone who had expected complete control. For just a second, Pelosi hadn't looked triumphant. She'd looked uncertain. "Proceed," she said tersely, returning to her seat, wearing the expression of someone who still believed the battle was already over. She had no idea that Karoline Leavitt was about to flip the entire hearing on its head. Leavitt rose, with quiet purpose, smoothing the front of her navy blazer. Her heels clicked with controlled rhythm on the marble floor as she walked toward the committee desk. The sudden silence in the room made the sound feel louder, almost like a drumbeat announcing a coming storm. "Madam Speaker," Leavitt began, her voice polite but unshaken, "the charts you've presented today contain data that's been selectively edited to suit a particular narrative." The calm clarity in her tone caught the room off guard. "I would like to submit for the record the complete, unaltered Federal Reserve economic reports covering the past 16 months. She handed the folder to the committee clerk, who passed copies around the panel. "These full reports tell a far more accurate and very different story. With a small nod, she signaled her aide. The screens behind her flickered and then displayed a new series of graphs. As you can see, manufacturing growth has averaged 4.2% annually during this administration. That represents a 15-year high. The numbers are not ambiguous. A ripple moved through the room. Cameras turned toward Pelosi, whose brow furrowed as she quickly skimmed through the documents in front of her. These figures contradicted the briefing material she'd been provided, and she knew it. But Leavitt was just warming up. "Madam Speaker," she continued, her voice unwavering, "I'd also like to address your statements on inflation." She reached for another document, this one bearing the official seal of the Congressional Budget Office. This is the CBO's independent analysis from last quarter. It presents a broader and more balanced picture, one your presentation failed to include. From the Republican side, a representative leaned in toward his microphone. "Miss Leavitt," he asked carefully, "are you suggesting the Speaker's office knowingly misrepresented official economic data before this committee?" The air in the room evaporated. A cold silence took over. Everyone stared at Leavitt, waiting for her to either backpedal or double down. She didn't hesitate. "I'm not suggesting anything, Congressman," she replied evenly, locking eyes with Pelosi. "I'm simply providing the full data set. The facts that the American people deserve to see." She turned toward the Speaker, her expression unreadable but composed. "Facts that clearly show inflation has decreased for 7 consecutive months under our administration's policies. That's not a spin. That's a reality backed by the Congressional Budget Office." The room was motionless. The Democrats' smiles had faded. Pelosi held her composure, but the tension in her jaw betrayed the shift. In that moment, the narrative had changed, and it was Karoline Leavitt, not the Speaker of the House, who now held the room's attention. The murmurs began almost instantly. Journalists glanced at one another, thumbs flying across phone screens trying to capture every unfolding second in real time. A Democratic representative leaned toward an aide, whispering with urgency as tension surged through the room like a lightning bolt about to strike. Then it happened, the moment that would dominate headlines for days. Karoline Leavitt reached calmly for one final document. Her movements were measured, composed. The paper she held bore the unmistakable seal of the Speaker's office, the header bold and official. "House Speaker's Economic Advisory Memo." "I'd like to submit one last document," she said, her voice clear and even, showing not even the faintest trace of triumph. "It's an internal communication from the Speaker's economic team, dated just 2 weeks ago." A wave of disbelief swept over the chamber. Pelosi's eyes narrowed. Leavitt read aloud without hesitation. It states, and I quote, "Current economic indicators show positive trends that contradict our public messaging. Recommend focusing on selected data points only when discussing administration economic policy." The room exploded. Republican committee members leapt to their feet, demanding answers. Journalists rose from their chairs, shouting questions over one another. Cameras zoomed in, locking onto Pelosi's face at the precise moment the truth hit her. She had been exposed, caught by her own words. The chairman slammed his gavel, shouting for order, but it was no use. Chaos had taken over. Pelosi's face paled. Her mouth opened, then shut again. The sharp confidence that once anchored her expression now stripped away. She knew the document was real. Someone within her circle, someone she trusted, had leaked it. Finally, as the shouting settled into stunned silence, Pelosi spoke. Her voice was low, almost uncertain. "Miss Leavitt," she said, her tone stripped of its earlier edge. "It's not uncommon in policy discourse to emphasize specific data points for clarity and public understanding." Leavitt didn't flinch. "Perhaps," she said steadily, her gaze unwavering, "but there's a vast difference between highlighting facts and deliberately obscuring them." She turned, not just to the committee, but to the cameras, to the nation. The American people deserve transparency. Not spin, not selective interpretation, the truth. There was no sound now, just the soft hum of camera equipment and the distant clicks of reporters typing furiously. "And the truth," Leavitt continued, "is that this administration's economic policies, despite what's been claimed here, today are delivering real results for real Americans. Jobs are growing. Inflation is easing. Wages are rising, and no amount of political theater can erase that." The room fell silent once more. But this time it wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the stunned, breathless stillness of collective disbelief. What had been choreographed as a calculated public humiliation of a young deputy press secretary had just flipped into one of the most unforgettable reversals in modern political history. And it had unfolded live, on national television, with millions watching. Within mere hours, the confrontation between Karoline Leavitt and Speaker Nancy Pelosi exploded across every major media platform. The hashtag #Leavitt takedown began trending at #1 nationwide. Clips of the dramatic moment she revealed the internal memo went viral, spreading across X, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. It became instant political legend. Fox News splashed. The headline, Pelosi exposed. Leavitt reveals Democrats misled public on economy. Conservative commentators praised Leavitt's calm under fire, calling her performance a masterclass in controlled rebuttal and the most effective counterstrike in congressional hearing history. Even media outlets traditionally hostile to the administration couldn't ignore the magnitude of what had happened. CNN ran a primetime segment titled, White House Aide Turns Tables on Pelosi in Stunning Exchange. The New York Times published a front-page analysis titled, Democrats Rattled, Messaging Crisis After Hearing Backfires. It included internal sources describing panic within party leadership and raised pointed questions about long-term credibility. The following morning, Leavitt was a household name. She appeared on Fox and Friends composed and professional, even as the hosts lauded her poise and impact. This isn't about personal victory, she said, calmly addressing the nation. It's about making sure the American people have access to honest, complete information. That's the foundation of a healthy democracy, and the only way citizens can make informed decisions about their futures. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Democratic damage control shifted into high gear. Pelosi's communications team released a carefully worded statement, claiming the internal memo had been taken out of context and was simply outlining general communication strategy, not intended to mislead the public. But the explanation didn't land. Journalists and political analysts immediately began dissecting the memo and comparing it to public statements made by Democratic leaders. The discrepancies were too glaring to ignore. Independent investigations confirmed that several economic figures cited by Pelosi had omitted critical context. Context Leavitt had exposed live in front of the country. The political fallout came fast. 3 moderate Democratic representatives held a surprise press briefing where they publicly questioned their own party's messaging. One congressman, speaking candidly, said, "If we're editing facts to win political points, then we've forgotten who we're here to serve." Back at the White House, Leavitt's performance had not gone unnoticed. According to senior staffers, the president himself called her directly after the hearing. "You didn't just defend our policies," he told her. "You showed America exactly who we're up against and why the truth still matters." Cabinet members who had once dismissed her as too young for the role were now actively seeking her input on messaging strategy. The balance of power in political communication had subtly shifted. Karoline Leavitt's performance didn't just ripple through Washington. It resonated deeply with ordinary Americans. On a national radio program, a grandmother from Michigan summed it up. That young lady stood her ground with facts, not just talking points. We need more of that. Political analysts quickly began speculating about Leavitt's future. We may be witnessing the rise of a conservative powerhouse, one cable news commentator said. She can clearly articulate complex policy, all while directly confronting the most seasoned members of the establishment. Her youth isn't a liability, it's her strength. She symbolizes the future. For Speaker Pelosi, the hearing marked a stunning miscalculation. What was meant to be a moment of dominance had backfired spectacularly. Instead of reinforcing her own authority, the event raised troubling questions about her office's integrity. The leaked memo exposed a level of strategic data manipulation that led even some Democrats to question the ethics of their communication. What else have they misrepresented? One prominent journalist asked during a live broadcast. A week later, independent analysts confirmed the key facts at the center of the controversy. Manufacturing was, in fact, growing at the fastest pace in over 15 years. Inflation had decreased steadily for 7 straight months. These weren't cherry-picked stats, they were now publicly validated. The administration's economic narrative, once seen as flimsy and inflated, was suddenly viewed through a lens of credibility. Perhaps the most lasting effect of the hearing wasn't the data itself, but the shift it represented in political dynamics. Leavitt showed that authenticity, precision, and preparation could defeat institutional theatrics. Her calm dismantling of Pelosi's arguments, backed by evidence, had changed the rules of engagement. No longer could seniority alone dominate public perception in an age of rapid information exchange. As the media storm continued, it only intensified Leavitt's growing influence. Conservative outlets hailed her as the voice of a rising generation. She gained over 500,000 social media followers in under 72 hours. Supporters dubbed her the future and Pelosi's worst nightmare. The internal memo, which might have gone unnoticed under different circumstances, now became a national flashpoint. Fox News dedicated full-length segments to dissecting how Democrats had manipulated economic data. Tucker Carlson invited Leavitt to his show, calling her the woman who exposed the most egregious economic deception in modern congressional history. Even traditionally progressive voices couldn't ignore what had happened. Vox published a headline, "How Democrats Lost the Economic Narrative." The article admitted that regardless of policy stances, trust was the casualty of selective transparency. Pelosi's allies scrambled to reframe the narrative, arguing Leavitt's performance was staged political theater. But the damage was done. Public trust in Democratic messaging dropped 12 points in just days. What made Leavitt's victory most remarkable was her preparation. Insiders revealed she'd studied economic reports until 2 a.m., anticipating every angle. She hadn't just won the moment, she'd earned it. One analysis by the Washington Post uncovered multiple instances of selectively edited charts used by both political parties. However, the paper noted that the Pelosi memo offered rare documented proof of intentional data manipulation. For everyday Americans, this revelation struck a nerve. The exchange hit a chord because it directly tapped into the growing frustration people felt toward political elites. Social media exploded with comments such as, "Finally, someone telling us the truth about the economy instead of playing politics," and "This is why we need young people in government. They haven't learned to lie yet." The international press quickly picked up the story. The London Times ran a major feature on Leavitt, dubbing her the new face of American politics, while Le Monde in Paris analyzed how the showdown signaled a generational power shift in Washington. Behind closed doors, Democratic leadership held emergency strategy meetings. Sources close to the situation revealed that Pelosi was livid over the leaked memo and immediately demanded an internal investigation to determine who had provided it to Leavitt. This internal probe created more turmoil within the Democratic Party. Younger staffers, many of whom had supported Leavitt, expressed their frustrations over leadership's obsession with finding the leaker rather than addressing the substance of the controversy itself. According to insiders, many felt that focusing on the leak was a distraction and a sign of a leadership out of touch with the real concerns of the party's younger base. On the other hand, Republicans wasted no time in capitalizing on the political windfall. The Republican National Committee launched a fresh ad campaign, using clips from the hearing and the pivotal moment when Leavitt exposed the memo. The ad's tagline, "They'll hide the truth, we'll show it," quickly gained traction. Congressional Republicans also referenced the memo during budget discussions, citing it to question every economic projection put forth by their Democratic colleagues. President Trump, sensing an opportunity to reinforce his administration's economic policies, seized the moment. He tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt showed America what happens when Democrats are forced to confront reality. Our economy is booming, and no amount of data manipulation can hide it." The tweet quickly went viral, adding to the momentum Leavitt had already built. A surprising twist came when several corporate CEOs publicly weighed in on the controversy. The CEO of a major manufacturing company praised Leavitt for highlighting the genuine growth in American manufacturing, which had often been overlooked or manipulated in political discussions. Meanwhile, a prominent tech leader took to social media to denounce the manipulated charts, calling them the kind of dishonesty that destroys public trust in institutions. The most surprising development occurred 2 weeks after the explosive hearing. A bipartisan group of younger congressional representatives gathered for a press conference and announced the formation of a new Economic Transparency Caucus. Their mission: to ensure that economic data presented to the American public would be accurate, complete, and free from partisan distortion. In a direct nod to the events that triggered their initiative, the group openly cited the Leavitt-Pelosi exchange as the catalyst for their action. For Karoline Leavitt herself, the fallout brought both unprecedented opportunity and heightened scrutiny. While her political profile had soared in record time, she now found herself in the middle of intense national attention. Every word she said, every appearance she made, was dissected by supporters and critics alike. Liberal commentators combed through her old social media posts, hunting for contradictions or controversial statements. But unlike many who falter under the pressure of sudden fame, Leavitt remained calm, composed, and laser-focused. In a live CNN interview, when asked if she felt personally vindicated by the reaction to the hearing, Leavitt responded without hesitation. "This isn't about me or Speaker Pelosi," she said. "It's about whether Americans can trust what they're hearing from Washington about the economy. I'll always fight for that transparency, regardless of the political consequences." Her words were clipped and shared widely, further solidifying her image as a no-nonsense truth-teller. 3 months after the hearing, the economic narrative in the nation had notably shifted. The administration's fiscal policies, once ridiculed and dismissed by many in the media, were now being discussed with a tone of new seriousness and nuance. Critics who had been quick to mock the numbers were now asking deeper questions. The memo Leavitt revealed had changed the conversation in fundamental ways. Nancy Pelosi, still a powerful and seasoned political figure, had not been dethroned by the confrontation, but she had been visibly affected. In subsequent public hearings and briefings, she spoke more cautiously about economic topics, often choosing to defer to committee analysts rather than deliver sweeping statements. The confidence with which she once delivered economic assessments had clearly taken a hit. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt was riding a wave of political momentum. What might have been a career-ending misstep, challenging one of the most powerful Democrats in Washington, had instead turned her into a household name. Speculation about her political future ran rampant. Some suggested a congressional run. Others believed she was destined to become a central figure in the next generation of Republican leadership. Whatever direction she chose, one thing was clear. Leavitt had changed the tone and stakes of political communication in Washington. By exposing the cracks in the system with nothing more than preparation, poise, and facts, she demonstrated that truth, when wielded with courage, could still prevail in politics. Thank you for watching this incredible story of how Karoline Leavitt took on Washington's elite. If you found this eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We bring you stories the mainstream won't touch. See you next time.